almost stepped right on it before I even realized that something was there. At the edge of my garden bed, wedged between two stones, there was a small, motionless brown shape. It blended so perfectly with the soil that even someone who had walked through that garden for years could have passed without noticing it. That was exactly what I was about to do, but something stopped me before I took another step. Something inside me said that I should bend down and take a closer look. What I found crouching silently beneath my own shadow was one of the most meaningful signs a piece of land could offer. That little frog had not arrived in my garden by accident, and it had not simply wandered there after losing its way. The frog had deliberately chosen that place as somewhere suitable to live. It had evaluated my soil, my water, the air around my plants, and the invisible chemistry of everything I had quietly built there. After testing all of those things with its own sensitive body, it had decided that my garden was worth staying in. Today, I am going to explain exactly what that small visitor was telling me. I will show you what these animals sense that you cannot see and what they do in your garden while you sleep. You will also learn why the presence of an amphibian may be one of nature's most honest measures of a garden's health. And I will tell you the story through a lesson my grandfather gave me on a summer morning many years ago. When I was a young boy, I spent every summer in my grandfather's garden. He was a man whose hands always smelled like soil and who stepped into the garden before the first light of dawn. That morning, he saw the frog I was about to step on and stopped me just in time. "Wait, son," he said. "Before you look at it, let me explain what you are really seeing." He began with science because my grandfather always said, "The greatest truths are hidden in the most ordinary places." According to him, frogs and toads belong to one of the oldest lineages of land-dwelling animals on Earth. Their ancestors had emerged from the oceans and moved onto land more than 360 million years ago. That happened long before the dinosaurs appeared, and long before the first flower ever opened. They had witnessed all 5 major mass extinction events, survived them, and continued living on this planet. They had adapted to every continent except Antarctica and to an astonishing range of climates and environments. Through all that time, their basic biology had changed very little for one simple reason. It worked. The feature my grandfather wanted me to understand most clearly was the skin of that small animal. Unlike other vertebrates, he explained, these animals do not drink water through their mouths. They absorb it through their skin. Their extremely permeable skin functioned like a living membrane, drawing moisture directly from the environment and carrying it into the body. They also performed part of their breathing through their skin and used it to help regulate body temperature. In the most literal sense, their skin was engaged in a constant, unfiltered conversation with the world around them. "Do you know what that means?" my grandfather asked as I continued staring at the frog. "Everything in your soil and water can pass directly into its body," he told me. "That includes every chemical, every toxin, every synthetic fertilizer, and every trace of pesticide present in the garden." There was no digestive barrier or filtering mechanism separating the chemistry of the garden from the amphibian's biology. That was why, according to my grandfather, scientists at the United States Geological Survey and the Global Amphibian Assessment described frogs and toads as exceptionally sensitive bioindicators of terrestrial ecosystems. When an environment deteriorated or synthetic chemicals accumulated in soil and water, amphibian populations were often the first to collapse. Their decline occurred quickly and visibly, making them an early warning system for the living world around us. "Does that mean the opposite is also true, Grandpa?" I asked him. "Of course it does, son," he replied without hesitation, smiling at me. "When an amphibian chooses a garden, remains there, returns to it, and begins reproducing, that place has passed a biological test no laboratory can imitate. No pH meter, soil testing kit, or professional assessment could communicate exactly what the continued presence of a frog revealed. The soil beneath the plants was not merely acceptable, it was genuinely and deeply clean." My grandfather smiled and added, "You did not simply grow vegetables, son, you built an ecosystem." He then explained exactly what the frog was doing in the garden while the rest of us were sleeping. "The hours between midnight and dawn are the most dangerous hours in a garden," he said. "That is when the creatures of the night emerge and begin moving through the beds." Slugs traveled silently among the seedlings, while snails slowly chewed their way through tender leaf tissue. Cutworms curled beneath the soil and severed young plant stems directly at their bases. Mosquitoes reproduced in whatever standing water they could find around the garden. Moths deposited eggs on the undersides of leaves, and within days, those eggs developed into hungry caterpillars. All of these creatures moved under the cover of darkness because the night helped protect them from predators. "But the frog does not need light in order to hunt, son," my grandfather explained. "Its eyes were adapted to low-light conditions, but its hunting strategy did not depend on vision alone. It detected vibration and movement with extraordinary sensitivity, following the slightest disturbances traveling through soil and fallen leaves. Those tiny vibrations allowed the frog to locate prey, even when the garden appeared completely dark and still. An adult toad can eat between 50 and 100 insects in a single night, my grandfather told me. Over an active season lasting from spring through fall, that added up to thousands of pests removed from the garden. The work required no pesticide, spray, granules, or chemical residue left behind in the soil or groundwater. My grandfather also told me about research published in the journal Herpetological Conservation and Biology. Gardens in agricultural areas with established amphibian populations showed measurably less pest damage than comparable areas, even after researchers controlled for other variables. "This is not a small effect, son," he said. "It is significant, consistent, and completely free. Your frog is running a pest management operation in the garden every single night." Frogs and toads were performing that work in places like this long before human beings ever invented agriculture. But my grandfather did not end his lesson there because hunting was only one part of the story. He connected our little garden to one of the most important ecological stories of our time. "Amphibians are disappearing, son," he said, and his voice suddenly became more serious. He gave me figures that I was too young to fully understand at the time. According to assessments available then, more than 40% of the world's amphibian species were threatened with extinction. That proportion was higher than the rate reported for any other vertebrate group, including mammals and birds. It was estimated that more than 200 amphibian species had disappeared completely since 1980. The causes included habitat destruction, climate change, agricultural chemicals accumulating in freshwater breeding systems, and the spread of a devastating fungal disease caused by Batrachochytrium. In some places, the springtime frog chorus that had once filled every night had grown disturbingly rare. Those calls had once been so familiar and constant that people barely noticed them while falling asleep. Now, hearing them in certain areas had become unusual enough to make people stop and listen. "That is why the frog in your garden is more than a personal blessing," my grandfather explained. "It represents one small piece of something that is quietly disappearing from the world. It belonged to a population that had found a place clean enough, safe enough, and rich enough in prey to survive. Perhaps without even realizing it," my grandfather said, "you have created a refuge." He taught me that small gardens, taken together, could provide some of the most important remaining amphibian habitat in densely populated areas. "In the United Kingdom," he said, "garden ponds support more amphibian populations than all the country's nature reserves combined. Your garden is not a place separate from the wild world, son, even if it sits beside your home." In many communities, an ordinary garden may be the only consistent piece of wild habitat that remains. "What should we do to help them then, Grandpa?" I asked him. "First and most importantly, protect what is already there," he replied as he pointed toward the sheltering frog. "If an amphibian has chosen your garden, the most valuable thing you can do may be nothing at all. Do not relocate it, handle it repeatedly, or allow cats to patrol the corners where it takes shelter. Leave it alone and it will continue doing the work it came there to do." Then he listed several simple things I could provide if I wanted to help more actively. Toads needed protection from direct sunlight because they were vulnerable to dehydration and would not remain in an exposed garden. A broken clay flower pot placed on its side in a shaded corner could become a perfect daytime shelter. A loose pile of rocks with dark openings or a generous layer of fallen leaves along a garden bed could provide similar protection. Even several large stones placed near water could create the cool, damp microhabitat a frog needed during the day before hunting at night. Water was also extremely important to my grandfather, although he explained that helping did not require a large pond. A shallow clay dish placed at ground level, kept filled, and supplied with 1 or 2 exit stones was often enough. "The important thing is that the water remains available consistently," he told me. "A container that dries out every few days will eventually encourage the animal to search somewhere else." Then he gave me his strongest instruction of all: remove synthetic garden chemicals completely. "No pesticides, no herbicides, and no highly concentrated synthetic fertilizers," he said firmly. "Not because those products fail to work, son, but because their secondary effects accumulate in the soil, the water, and the bodies of the animals you are trying to protect." My grandfather insisted that this choice should never be viewed as a sacrifice. "It is a bargain," he explained. "You give up chemical control, and in return, you receive an ecosystem capable of balancing itself. That living system will be more effective, longer lasting, and far less expensive than any product sold at a garden center." My grandfather ended with words that I have remembered clearly to this day. "When that frog chose my garden, it asked almost nothing from me, son. It needed clean soil, a little shade, some water, and a place where it could work without being disturbed. In return, it gave me something that could never be manufactured or purchased. It gave me a living certificate proving that what I had built was real and that my soil was truly alive. It proved that the choices he had made quietly and patiently had created a place the natural world trusted enough to return to." "That is not a small thing, son," he said. "In a world where wild spaces are shrinking and nights are growing quieter, it is extraordinary." From that day forward, whenever I walked through my grandfather's garden at dusk, I listened for quiet movement among the fallen leaves. Sometimes I caught sight of two small eyes reflecting the final light from somewhere between the plants. By then, I finally understood what I was actually seeing, and the meaning was unmistakable. Evidence. It was evidence that the garden was worth protecting and that the soil beneath it remained alive. It was also evidence that nature will return whenever we give it a genuine opportunity. What about you? Have you ever discovered a frog or toad living in your own garden? Did it appear after the rain, or did it return to the same corner season after season? Tell me about it in the comments below, because I would truly enjoy reading your story. One of the most beautiful things my grandfather taught me was to pay attention to visitors who arrive without an invitation. Many of the most extraordinary garden stories I have ever heard came from people who simply paid attention to what was around them. And if you would like to meet another creature that chose your home with the same quiet certainty, the next video is waiting for you.